Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us a supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. I'm your host, Corey Pheez, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005, hailing from the great state of Connecticut. We are recording on Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, and today I'll be interviewing Chef Eli Kulp on the topic of delicious dining and disability. So this year, I'm going to be meeting with other super adaptables who have preserved or persevered following their spinal cord injury and push forward, creating not only a lane for themselves, but also sharing a path for others to follow. So Eli Kulp's journey in food began in a small town in Washington, where a teenage job washing dishes lit a passion that carried him to the Culinary Institute of America, and then into some of New York's most celebrated restaurants, including Oceana del Pasto, Chorizo Italiana Specialities. In 2012, he came to Philly to relaunch the iconic fork-earning national acclaim and helping to shape the city's dining scene. His work with Elian's High Street Hospitality Group led to honor from Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, and the James Byrd Foundation, and recognition as one of the most influential chefs of the past decade by the Philadelphia Inquirer. In 2015, however, Eli's life was changed forever by the Amtrak derailment that left him paralyzed. After years of grief and searching for purpose, he found a new voice with the Chef Radio podcast, which allowed him to reconnect with chefs, rediscover his passion, and re-enter the industry he has loved since he was 14 years old. That energy grew into Delicious City Philly, a podcast celebrating the city's dynamic food and drink. With Delicious City, Eli and his team launched Philadelphia's first ever chef and restaurant awards, the Tasties. Quickly called the best night in Philly food. The Tasties spotlight the people shaping the city's culinary and beverage community and are now heading into the second year, bigger and better than before. Beyond his career, Eli is most proud of being a father to his 13-year-old son, whose strength and spirit inspire him every day. Eli, welcome.
Corey, wow, that was a mouthful. So you nailed it. Well done. As a podcast host myself, I can appreciate a good cold read. So, yeah, well done.
No, absolutely. I mean, when I started looking into just your history, I mean, it's a lot to take in, and but we're going to dive into that a little bit later. But before we jump into the interview, I want to remind everyone that Super Adaptables now has an exclusive series recorded in 2025 called Dreaming of America, where we examine social safety net programs in the United States, ranging from your typical Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security benefits to constitutional principles such as due process and freedom of the press. We discuss with experts on how recent changes to these social safeguards and challenges, rather, impact all of us and why these safety nets are foundational to a democracy that works for everyone. You can find all of our episodes and community discussions on these topics by scrolling back in time in your Super Adaptables podcast feed, or access our expert episodes by searching for Dreaming of America, where you can listen to podcasts. I want to share this story because as soon as, we're diving in and trying to figure out, who's going to be the next person we wanted to interview, it reminded me of like when I met my wife. And when I met my wife, it really involved food, and there's no exaggeration about that. So like a mutual friend of ours, they wanted to cook for me as a housewarming gift, and she needed help bringing the delectables over. So she prepared like a smorgasbord. It was like Caribbean cuisine because I'm Jamaican, and American cuisine such as rice and peas, baked chicken, spaghetti, and salad, to name a few. I really enjoyed the time, the taste, and most importantly, me and the love of my life. But whether in the comfort of your home or a dinner date for two, or filling your belly up at an all-you-can-eat buffet, food is a staple that transcends culture and politics and acts as a catalyst for bringing home people together. So, it's like the idiom, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And this idiomatic expression implies that when food is prepared carefully and with love, it can open the door to a world that includes both monogamous relationships and lifelong friendships. So, Eli, bro, let's chow down. So, yeah, go into like what took place. I still can remember watching the news when that crash happened, and
Okay.
I was hurt. I was devastated because I immediately thought about, how many people's lives were lost, how many people were severely injured, and just the disruption those types of calamities happen. So if you could just walk us through, like, your history, like,
Hmm.
I was in Mossy Rock, starting there and just, run the whole gambit.
Yeah, for sure. So, Rock is a very small town in Washington State in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. My parents were a couple traveling hippies in a Volkswagen bus in the 70s and came across this small town, saw this listing in a window for a trailer at the end of an old dirt road, single wide trailer. And they bought it. I think it was like $8,000 for 3 acres and a
Mm,
trailer. And that's where I was raised, and that's and it was beautiful area in between Mount Rainier to our north and Mount St. Helens to our south. Cascade Mountain Range, just not even that far away. So, just a really amazing childhood growing up. Running around the forest all day long. Small town, sports, close knit community, all that. But early on, I came into food because an intrepid lady who had just started her retirement wanted to move to a small town, open up a small restaurant and cafe. She did that in our town of Mossy Rock, and we didn't have a restaurant. We had a tavern and we had two gas stations where you could get food, but we didn't have a restaurant. So when I say food, I mean like your standard gas station food, fried chicken,
right.
potatoes, etc. But the uh, when she opened this restaurant, it was out of place. It had linens on the tables, it had linen napkins, and I wanted a dirt bike. And we had dirt bikes growing up, but they're all kind of like junky ones, kind of half-assed put together ones because we didn't really have much money. So my parents like, listen, you want to get a dirt bike, get a job. So my dad said, this restaurant's opening. Why don't you go ask for a dishwashing job? I did end up being a busboy and dishwasher. A very, very similar story to a lot of chefs out there. 14 years old, you hear that story often. And from there, got into the kitchens and eventually got into, really finding a passion for food. And by the time I left high school, I knew what I wanted to do. Went down to Portland, Oregon, went to culinary school down there, spent about 4 years there, went up to Seattle, spent about another 3 years in Seattle. But then I realized I wanted to go to New York City and really cook with the big dogs and get into really your classic fine dining and really learn the skills and develop a passion for that style of cooking. So
You were 14 when you got that job?
the originally, yeah, I was 14. Yeah, when I
Wow.
first got into cooking.
Love the work ethic.
Yeah, my dad, hardworking, logger, worked in timber. And so it was, we saw what he did every day up at 4 a.m., back home at, 8 p.m. So, work ethic was something that, we had chores, it's really important to instill that in your kids early on. So, the, once I moved out to New York, I spent 10 years in New York City and
Mm,
then got the job in Philly. So Philly was a whirlwind. I came down to Philadelphia in 2012 with the assumption that if it didn't go right, I could go back to New York City. I didn't really have any desire to go to Philadelphia. I was really looking to stay in New York, but a recruiter called me and was like, "Hey, what do you think about Philly?" And I was like, "Well, I've never actually been there." And in my mind, it was like, I don't know, a 4 hour drive away, but in reality, it's only, without traffic, it's really about, 2 hours. So ended up coming down to Philly and found that, I really just love what the city brought and the energy and it's a little bit smaller of a city, but nonetheless, it has a big heart and people really love the food community down here, the restaurants and all that. So within 2 years of being down here, we reopened Fork, which had been around for 15 years, but we relaunched it. We opened up a second restaurant called High Street, and that was a bakery, pasta, all day cafe. And then we opened up a kitchen in Rittenhouse Square, which is kind of the main kind of ritzy area of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And yeah, so, and then, we were opening one in New York. So I was commuting on the Amtrak train a lot between Philadelphia and New York. And uh, I was actually I had just moved back to New York. So because we were opening this restaurant and, before we really even got open, the train crashed and left me with I guess it's a C45.
Okay. Yeah.
So pretty high level. I can move my arms, but I don't have any, wrist or hand movement.
Okay.
So, that's kind of important if you're a chef.
For sure.
So, immediately it just changed my career. It basically was like a hard stop in the
Mm.
physicality of being a chef. Mentally, we were still in the middle of opening a restaurant. So, I almost had no time to even grieve. We had to get back to work and picking out, whether it's paint colors or menu concepts or whatever. Thankfully, I had a great team of chefs that were in Philadelphia that were able to come up to New York and help get us started. But yeah, it was quite the crazy couple years after the injury. The other thing too, like my wife at the time, the injury was a lot for her, and we see this often with injuries and spinal cord injuries, where if your relationship was really tight and you had a really great relationship, and a lot of times it'll work out, but if the relationship was a little bit fractured or anything, sometimes those fractures can turn into large breaks, and my marriage never worked out after that. So I was not only like losing my marriage at the same time, but I was also losing my independence. And with that, it was a really dark time. I ain't gonna lie. Like it was, I had to get back to work, and I did. But you're doing rehab. You're trying to figure out your home life situation. You're trying to figure out your home health aids. It's just not to mention, the bowel routine, like everything, how it is. Like it's just
Yeah.
you're relearning how to be a human. You're for all intents and purposes, we are turned back into infants, dependent on everything, and not being able to really even know what the best course of action is for any one problem that could arise. So,
Yeah, I had a
um,
caregiver that said one day when he was leaving, he said, once a man, twice a child. So that proverbial saying rings true in the community that we're now a part of. You are literally, being cleaned by somebody else. You're being fed by someone else, driven by somebody else. And sometimes you don't even feel like you have a choice in the matter. And so, yeah,
yep,
that struggle for independence is real, and your relationships can become fractured. I mean, I was engaged at the time that I got injured, and yes, it fell apart. Not being able to, one, it was distance, um, and just the circumstance. We were very young, and when you think about even getting engaged, and I always tell people, you can go back and forth about what type of vows that you have, but that sickness and health part is a big thing that you have to consider heavily before you even say I do, because you don't know what the worst will look like, especially at your point in time. You're at like the height and the pinnacle, you know what I mean? You're opening up several restaurants, you're managing, you're traveling back and forth, you're getting recognized for, the great chef that you are. And then boom, you have to deal with all of these variables that come with paralysis. Yeah,
for
man,
sure. Well said.
that's amazing. So you were opening Fork in New York.
It was actually a high street. So it was our
Oh,
high
high
street
school.
concept that we were opening up in New York. And we had signed the lease in March, and I got hurt in April, or sorry, May. So it wasn't long after, construction had barely started and everything when I got injured. So it was, and I have a great partner in Ellen Yin, still partners to this day. I'm still involved with the restaurants. It looks differently now. Over the years, I, you know, I restaurants aren't really made for people with disabilities.
Yeah,
Thankfully,
talk about
all of
that.
our spots were wheelchair accessible to get in. There was no steps in any of them, which is like, I mean, that's unheard of, really. especially in older cities like New York and Philly. The fact that none of them had any barrier to get into, which in hindsight was massive. But the reality of it is, every square inch of a restaurant is has to make money. Either you're producing products that will make the money, like food prep, etc., or you're it's the front of the house. And that even rings more so for New York. Like in New York, we didn't even have an office that was accessible to me. We didn't have the really anywhere for me to like be and hang out, because while the we did have an office downstairs, it was like a little makeshift corner of the prep space, right? So in New York, it's the real estate is insane. So
Yeah.
maximizing every inch for sales is what you have to do. So for me, the frustration started in New York when I really didn't feel I could just be in the restaurant. Either I was like in the way of the servers or I was in the way of the kitchen, and it got to the point where it that stress added up to the point where in a lot of ways I didn't want to be there anymore, and I started getting very when I was in the hospital, I was like, okay, I can still make this work. Like, I'm excited for what's going on. We had a lot of positive momentum, a lot of buzz in the city that we were doing this. And, but then I realized, after being in the environment, especially after we got open, that, the reality started to set in, and I started getting really frustrated, with the marriage thing falling apart and then this not working out. I started to resent, in a lot of ways, the the business. I resented my ambition because I felt like that ambition sort of clouded, the growth that I wanted to have across multiple cities. I think a lot of times when you get injured, you want to find that reason.
Yeah.
But in reality, wrong place, wrong time. Often, sometimes people do some dumb shit and and it ends up costing them. But, for me, I just had to kind of come to grasp and say, like, you know what, like, the guy, basically the train engineer driving the train, went
Yep.
into a 50-mile-an-hour corner at 108 miles per hour, thinking he was in a different part of the route to New York City. So 8 people lost their lives. I mean, when you think about it critically, obviously, it wasn't my ambition that all these people died, but it was, for me, it was that idea that my ambition kind of put me on that track, literally, and kind of see it all fall apart. But really, the one saving grace in all of this, and I attribute to me even being here today, is the fact that I had a 3-year-old son who didn't care. He's like a dog. He's like a puppy dog, right? Like, they don't care what if you're in a wheelchair or not. They just know that you're their owner. And just like my son, like, he just knew that I'm his dad. And yeah, at 3 years old, like, it was fun for him. He's like, oh, I get to hang out in the wheelchair and drive around. And
Yeah.
so like to see that perspective of those from his point of view, and realizing that, yes, my life professionally, which I poured so much into, was never going to be the same. I still had something really important to keep me grounded and keep my
Yeah.
perspective from getting clouded too much.
No, absolutely, and that part is important. And since you mentioned it, that's one of my questions. As a father, how challenging was it for you to like even participate in preparing meals? What did you do to adapt? And currently, do you use any specific types of assistive technology when you're in the kitchen or eating?
So, as far as, with him, my level of injury is pretty high.
Right.
Um, you know, C4 is pretty high level. And if it was just a half inch higher, I would not even be able to use my arm. So, the I am thankful for that. I'm grateful for that. However, it still creates problems. And I think, like I said, the physicality of being a chef changed, but mentally, I'm still able to work with him in the kitchen. He does like to cook. It's fun to get in there and make simple things, whether it's pizza or really basic things like a good mac and cheese. So it's a lot of me using my voice more than anything.
Right.
And that goes with my assistants as well, like working with them to help cook those meals. Like that's still something I really enjoy, especially if it's somebody who understands, a little bit about the kitchen. If they're for a ground at the ground level, it can be a little challenging, but for the most part, the girls that do work for me are all pretty well versed in the kitchen and take
Right.
a lot of advice uh, really freely. So, you know, the only adapted piece of equipment I use is really for eating, which is I use the Dining for Dignity, which is those adaptable forks, which are really a godsend, and
Mm,
um, built by somebody who also is quadriplegic. So the that's really that. As far as like knives, like cutting, all that, chopping,
yeah.
I haven't found anything that really works for me or that is, other than like I've seen some of those ones like you strap them up on your arm and they're like
Yeah.
they're
You
like
got to
some sort of
chop.
like, yeah, it's like, I mean, I might be able to chop an onion or potato kind of really rudimentarily, but I'm not going to like perfectly dice, or chiffonade some basil with it. So,
I totally get it. For me, when I had my first child, I was thinking, me and my wife would just brainstorm, like, how are we going to connect? I can't physically hold them or I can't, give them a bottle or anything.
right.
But I think a lot of it for me was just like you talked about earlier, coming to a realization that here are some things that I cannot do. And despite like the mental hurdle that you have to jump through, you still got to figure it out and you still have to continue. So what we would do is when they were first born, I'm talking about like within the first week, when I'm laying on my side, we would tuck like a pillow and just let them lay right there. And I could just put my cheek to them. Cause I was thinking about all the things that we learned in like breastfeeding class. They're like skin to skin and all of that stuff is important to connect with your child. And when he was old enough to start holding the bottle by himself, I just wedge him in between my arm while I'm sitting in bed and he'd just pick up his bottle, drink, fall asleep in my arm. If he was like crying or upset or whatever, I just kind of rock back and forth like that, and that would help put him to sleep. My youngest though, that guy, all he just wanted his crib, no matter
Okay.
what. And even to this day,
Uh,
he's the type to tell you, "Hey, Daddy, I'm about to go take a nap," and I'm just like,
uh,
sure, that's what you want to do, but
how old are they?
so my oldest now is 13, and my youngest, ironically enough, his name is Elijah, and we call him Eli,
Oh yeah,
as
nice,
well. Yep, he's 10. So
nice
they're
man,
they're
nice
very
work, nice work.
rambunctious kids. But like when you talked about preparing meals, when my wife was working, because she used to work in insurance, when she was away, I would just dictate to my caregiver how to season the meat,
Yep,
put in the meat tenderizer, stick the fork through it. I wanted it to be cooked all the way through. I would do all those things because though it's not me physically doing it, they're my arms and they're my legs. So all ideas begin in your mind and then you articulate it. So that's how I feel like I'm participating in trying to prep meals, and that's how I personally adapt. As you spoke earlier, I'm a high
nice.
quad C4, all I can do is shrug my shoulders, but that doesn't mean I don't have a voice to speak. I wanted to go back and talk real briefly about what have you done or what are you trying to change in terms of when you go into a restaurant? Because when I go in, first thing they're like, "Oh, you want us to move the chair for you? Is this table good enough for you?" I have the same chair as you. Mine is the V5 Corpus. It's a standing
Okay.
chair, so I have the elevator lift, so I can go to the bar stools,
Yep,
which
I
I
like getting
like
a
doing
bar.
that.
Yep, yep.
But what are you thinking about, like how to change the layout in a restaurant when you come in? Are you thinking about why not have higher tables for people so that they can roll under?
Yeah, something that maybe it's just my own personal take on things. I'm sort of like often I often struggle with being an advocate versus trying to live normally. So it's quote unquote normally, right? So um, the table height, right, of a table, it's really hard to get under a standard table often. Whether it's the foot pedals underneath, this, hitting the legs of the table,
Right.
or like some tables are just an inch or two different than other tables, and that can have a really big impact on my dining experience because
Mm.
if it's too low, then like I use an adaptable fork, but by no means am I as efficient as I used to be with it. So it can leave me in a lot of pain in my neck, in my back,
Mm.
exhaustion by the time I'm done eating. So, there's no doubt that a properly sized table makes a massive difference. That's why I always prefer if I can get up to a bar on a corner of a bar or something and I can elevate up and kind of meet the bar where it's best for me, I will take that 10 out of 10 times, or a
Right.
high top table. A lot of people don't realize that our chairs do go up and down, so that is a benefit. Um, so often, I, I don't I don't raise a stink. I really try to be amenable to the restaurant because I understand the pressure that are on restaurants, right?
Yeah.
I'm also part of that community, and it really is a community. So I try to represent the best of that community when I'm out dining. If people ask me for advice, on how to better equip their staff, their tables. I'm going to offer that. I think often also just as, if you're a restaurant that you have maybe only a step or two to get in, purchasing one of those aluminum ramps that are easily, thrown out and
Yeah.
having a sign on the window that says, just inquire inside for a ramp. Those things are massive, right? It might not be a ADA accessible restaurant. They might not
Right.
have, the bathrooms or something, which listen, like if I can get in a restaurant, I'm pretty happy on that. I'll figure out the bathroom situation.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that I take care of my business before I go in, so that way I'm not, trying to figure out, an SOS situation. So
Sure.
the for me, it's just being there if people have questions, but also through my podcast, things like that, I will often bring up or the restaurants that do have a ramp, I will frequent and I will also give them love in a sort of a way to help motivate other restaurant owners if they hear the podcast to kind of just think about ways that they can adapt their restaurant to suit a population that we have spending money. I mean, we want to go out and eat just like everybody else. So if they have room or a way to make it accessible easily, it's easy return on their investment.
No, no, you're absolutely right. I'm thinking like when you're talking about that, I'm just envisioning you as like an Anthony Bourdain of sorts. When you come in, I wonder if they're looking like, yo, that's Chef Eli Kulp, man.
Uh-huh.
Listen, everybody, make sure them forks don't have no spots on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
He asks for it, medium well or whatever it is. Like, let's make sure it's prepared the right way because you have a voice in the community and it will spark interest. I watched, a couple of your podcasts, especially the ones just talking about the vegan foods and eco chefs and whatnot. I really want to get into it because I think that's important. But one of the things that the gentleman on the eco chef, I mean not the eco chef on the vegan podcast
Hmm.
spoke about was
Yep.
that somebody in the community ate at his restaurant and then told other people about coming there, right? And that can make and
Sure.
break you, if you do have somebody of note, eating at your establishment. So, just on that topic about it. So, last year we just spent talking about social safety nets, right? And one of the things we talked about were SNAP benefits and, you know, food pantries and how those work and how they can be beneficial to helping curb, you know, poverty and also helping to curb like the hunger crisis that we find ourselves, you know, in a lot of ways, it's like, you know, almost like self-manufactured. Because at the end of the day, some restaurants throw away, you know, thousands of dollars of foods because their staple is, you eat fresh here and what have you. So
Right.
what is your view of restaurants completely turning over all uncooked or unused foods and ingredients to local food pantries to reduce hunger in their local communities? Um,
Yeah.
you spoke to Eco Chef Tom Hunt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tom is a brilliant chef out of England and somebody who's dedicated his life into figuring out how to take very common ingredients, simple ingredients, and turn them into something spectacular. Whether it's like a rutabaga and treating it like an Easter ham and glazing it, and like just different thoughtful ways of turning often what's viewed as throwaway items and turn them into something. We use the word upcycling a lot. In our restaurants, we have a pretty hardline approach to ensuring that we don't waste. It's really part of our ethos. And when it comes to, we consider ourselves sustainability friendly restaurants. So we do a really good job about not throwing away product or having a bunch left over at the end of the day. We do have, there's a few different, and their names are going to escape me, but there are different apps now, for example, where if we have extra bread left over at our bakery or pastries, we can basically create these to-go boxes, and
Mm,
people can come by and pick them up. So they get discounted into the day. The everything's so fresh, it's usable, but we're not going to sell it the next day, or we don't have a way to upcycle it into something else. So, those are great. We have, there's local networks of drivers that will come around and pick up leftover food from your restaurants and then distribute that out to food banks. So we've used those before. So there's really great networks of individuals out there that are doing some incredible work, and they're using tech to really be the main driver here and the way and the catalyst to make it all work. And so we definitely use those whenever we can. However, if we have a bunch of waste at the end of the day, we're doing something wrong to begin with. So we really want to make sure that we have our PARs in line. We understand the ebb and flow of business. We have a lot of data these days that we can pull from, whether, we're watching weather forecasts, events in town, things like that we are always having to adjust. Each restaurant has a P&L meeting each week that we go over day by day
yeah.
of what we're projecting for the week to come and figuring out our PARs for our prepped items as well as our need, the staff that we need and all of that. And restaurant math. While people say that labor is a variable cost, meaning it should go up and down with the level of amount of service you're doing. We also think sustainability is making sure that our staff is happy as well. So, we're not necessarily going to cut or hurt people's livelihoods. If the business isn't quite where we want it, we want to make sure that our staff is taken care of as well. So, we're able to kind of meet in the middle a little bit with that and find ways that we can really, the running a restaurant is an ecosystem, right? We're not a chain. We're not trying to get squeeze the most ROI out of every single decision. We extend hospitality to our teams the same way we expect them to extend hospitality to our guests coming in the door. So, we really try to take that approach where whether it's the food, the way we're serving it, the way that we're upcycling it, or the way that we're giving it out. We're very community minded, and my business partner is very aligned with that.
No, I love that. I think about it all the time. Have you ever heard of the Sugar Factory?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so one day I and my wife were having a dinner at the Sugar Factory, and this group of people next to us, they were like to the right. They got up, and I mean, it was like most of their food was untouched.
Oh
And
man.
if anybody knows out there, that's viewing, if you haven't been to the Sugar Factory, it is not the cheapest restaurant
Nope.
on the planet. It's
Nope.
expensive to eat there. Just get the goblet alone. That'll set you back 30 plus dollars. But it's an enjoyable experience. But I looked at the food and I cringe because what it makes me think back is the early stages of my injury where I was on a peg feeding tube and I was unable to eat.
Oh
And
man.
I spent 3 weeks not being able to eat. So I understand what it feels like to just go hungry.
Mm.
And you have a taste or a desire or want in your mouth, and you're just like, you can't have that because fear of you and choking. You appreciate so much like all the other events, and especially like in my early 20s. It wasn't like I had a lot of money, and you're relegated to eating food on the ship because I used to be in the Navy. Um, but it made me think about all those CSs or culinary specialists and how much food that they have to go through and do. I spent a lot of time even watching, and maintaining and helping with logistics when they're moving food from one ship or one part of the ship to another, and it's boxes on boxes. I forgot what it is, and you probably would appreciate it. It's on YouTube. They show you culinary specialists when they go to school and what they have to do. And some of them work in like different portions of the ship, like different galleys. Like the galley in the after the ship is usually like the better type of food. And then
Uh-huh.
midship, at least
Uh-huh.
on the carrier, you're talking about cold cuts and whatnot. And then when you go more forward, that's like your general hot dogs, hamburgers, and things like that. And they divide it up. But you know, you have to just look at them and say, man, they're in a hot kitchen, preparing all these meals, and they had to go undergo a lot of scrutiny in order to get better at that. And then you also mentioned something that I think is important because I have own two of them are those aluminum ramps. Like I said, I'm a foodie for real, and I was watching the episode on, I think it was like CNN or somewhere, and they're talking about the chip shop, which is located in Brooklyn, and they were talking about how you can bring whatever you want and they'll deep fry it. And they show deep fried Twinkies and all. I'm
Oh
like, oh
man.
my gosh, I gotta go there. So we drive all the way to Brooklyn from Connecticut. So it's about 2 hours, 3 hours with traffic sometime.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was inaccessible.
Oh no.
I was like, oh my gosh. Wish I had made me scout places now
Mm.
ahead of time. Like I'm on Google Maps trying to make sure, like, is it okay? And my wife always is good about saying, hey, my husband's in a motorized wheelchair. Is there going to be space? Like, recently we just ate at Michael Jordan's Steakhouse, which was pretty good.
Mm.
And they were very accommodating there as well.
Nice.
Take us back real quick about just like some of your culinary influences, and what was the first meal you ever cooked, and what was the first meal you had after injury, and kind of, you spoke about it, but like, what gave you the impetus to continue to go back after you dealt with the grief and the frustration
Yeah.
and losses? What made you like say, you know what, I'm still going to get involved in this community?
Yeah, thinking back to the first food that I really cooked, or the first meal that I really cooked, it was a funny story. So I'd worked in this restaurant for a couple years now, and one of my jobs, I think it was like maybe Sundays, one of our specials was like homemade lasagna, right? So I knew how to make lasagna and do it pretty well. It wasn't like handmade pasta or anything; it was out of the box, but I knew how to like build it and all that. And so one day, and I was kind of a smart ass in school, and one day I got into a fight, and needless to say, I got suspended for a couple days, and I knew I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna be in hot water. I think I was like 16 years old. I knew I was probably not gonna be able to drive my car for a while and all this stuff. So I
Been there.
went to the store. I had money because I had a job, so I had my own money. So I went to the store and I bought all the ingredients for lasagna. I rushed home. It was probably like late morning, early afternoon, and rushed home. I picked up the house. My mom's house is always clean, so it wasn't like I had much to do. I took the vacuum. I didn't even run the vacuum. I just ran it over the carpet a few times to make it look like I vacuumed, right? And then I made lasagna. And so my mom got home. She worked at the school, right? So she knew what had already happened, and I know she was already livid, right? And
Right.
she used to say, because our school was so small, we had the elementary, high school, and at middle school, like one big block. So she used to say when she see the high school principal walking down the hall, she'd duck in the room because she thought he was going to tell her something about me, right? So
Yeah.
I went home, I made lasagna, and I had the whole meal, garlic bread, the whole thing, right? And my mom got
Nice.
home, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, this is not going to be good. But she was so happy, and that was when I realized the power of food. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
how it can just change people's day in a heartbeat. So that was like the first meal that I really cooked. The first meal after I was after I was injured was actually, outside the hospital, of course, I'm talking. It was when my mom is Dutch and my uncle was visiting from the Netherlands.
Mm.
And I was in Atlanta. I went down to the Shepherd Center down in Atlanta after I was
Yep.
injured. And
Mhm.
so there was a restaurant down the hill, and I think I'd been injured for probably like close to 8 weeks at that point, but didn't really have the strength to, even drive my motorized chair with my arm. Like I didn't have the power to really even push it very far, just the joystick, right? 'Cause my arms were very, very weak. I could hardly move them after I was injured. So we ended up going out to this restaurant. I think it was, God, it wasn't an Outback. It was like one of those kind of mid-level steak house chains. I forget what it was.
Understand.
Um, I should know. Drawn, I can see the inside of it, but it's dark wood. But
Not
regard,
Texas Long, not Longhorn
it was like one
Steakhouse,
of those. Yeah, like one of those
Texas
places, right?
Roadhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we went to dinner that night, and it was unremarkable, but that was really the first meal I had out. I think when I got back to New York City and I was really got my life together and everything, and I was able to kind of really start, going to restaurants that I would consider, exciting for me. Because I think when you work in fine dining, you're always exploring, right? Being a chef is a career of never-ending learning. And especially at a high level, when you're trying to, you know, when you're getting Food and Wine Best New Chef or Bon Appetit Best New Restaurants in the country, those recognitions, like you're not just cooking, you're not at a steakhouse just flipping steaks. You know what I mean? This is real cooking from your heart, your narratives for your food. What it means. Like when I came down from New York, I really wanted to explore Pennsylvania cuisine and regional cuisine, South Jersey, Pennsylvania. And my family's roots were in Pennsylvania. I
I was
never
going to say,
stepped.
then the Dutch colonized certain parts.
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania Dutch is a little bit of a misnomer that the Pennsylvania Dutch are actually Dutch. Actually, Pennsylvania Dutch is technically Deutsch, which means German. So
Gotcha.
Deutschland. So they're actually German settlers that came over in the early 1600s, and that's where the Amish came from. That's where the Pennsylvania Dutch come from.
Yeah.
So that's my dad's side. So we've been over here since the 1600s. My mom was a Dutch citizen from the Netherlands. So they had met at a campground, Lake Tahoe, before they got married. But for me, it was really exploring my roots. So I took a dig. I love history. I think history always informs the future, right? The present.
Too.
So for me, it was like digging deep into old books, old stories, old legends, and sometimes even taking a simple thing like a Philly pretzel and turn it into like a fine dining bite.
Mhm.
Philadelphia cream cheese, for example, right? Like it's ubiquitous around the world. Well, what we would do, we'd take milk from a farm. We would take the hay from the same farm. We would steep the hay in the milk to kind of give it like a flavor, kind of a grassy note, and then we'd make cream cheese, our house-made cream cheese with that. So it may seem very simple on the surface, but in reality, we were really telling a story, or we were doing tongue-in-cheek cuisine, or and
Yeah.
so for me to get excited about a restaurant or a place that going out, I needed to have a unique perspective. Like I'm fine with eating at a great Chinese restaurant or a great you know, uh, old school Italian restaurant every once in a while. But for me, what gets me excited is seeing a restaurant where the chef is really pushing a boundary, developing their own narrative. As chefs, a lot of times there's like different stages of becoming a chef, right? As a cook, you're learning from different perspectives. You work for probably 5 to 10 chefs on average before you become a chef. Then as a sous chef, you start getting the creative process a little bit, but you're also learning the business side of things. Then you become a chef de cuisine, which basically just means you're running the kitchen for the chef. And then you're able to start putting your ideas on the menu, and then you become a chef. And often you're regurgitating a lot of what you know already. You might
Yeah.
just take little pieces from here and there and create a dish, but these are techniques that you've already used. But then there's this the sort of the when you hit like the enlightenment stage of being a chef, and that means that you start to create your own language through your food, your own techniques, your own, and, you're building your own team and your own languages through that food and presenting it. And that's really when you find the restaurants that are at that the 1% of the 1% that are doing
Yeah.
really special food. And that's what I try to seek out often when I'm eating. But I also love a great meal that just makes you feel warm and fuzzy. So
Love that.
I definitely don't get too picky when I'm out.
Well, that's pretty cool. Um, there's going to be a lightning round of sorts, but I wanted to kind of get your take on, the way that we have to eat now with a disability is very, very important, right? So, as a person who loves to eat, I do have to watch it as a diabetic, just as a quadriplegic in general. Some of the things that I was doing when I first got hurt, and I can still remember it. I'm happy to be able to share it with you. But I had a caregiver, his name was Gerard, and man, they were trying to run me through like soups, then puree, and then solid foods. And I already knew back in ICU, the 3 weeks I spent up there, that I could swallow because the respiratory therapist would sneak in juice and soda through a syringe. And
There
I would
you
drink
go.
like my water. I'd have like my fiance and one of my close friends block the door. And I'm like, give me the whole cup of water. So I'm like drinking. So I know I can swallow, but he would like low key give me Hot Pockets.
Oh,
And I'm
nice.
eating all those, and then one day my respiratory therapist, this is like when I'm in the like basically step down in the VA hospital. My
Yeah.
respiratory therapist comes in, he's like, what do we have going on here? And he was only a few years older than me. I was 22 at the time of my injury, so he was about 26. And I said, yeah, pepperoni Hot Pockets. He's like, how long you been eating those? I said, probably about 3 weeks. Right now, he said, take a bite. And I bit it, swallowed it. He said, man, I'm not going to put you on puree. You're good to go. So,
Oh, nice.
I think about those early stages, and I had lost so much weight. I lost all my muscle. Like you, I'm a tall
Yep.
guy. I'm 6'2", 240 or so.
Hmm.
But those are processed foods, right? And they're not the healthiest choice. So what's your opinion on the view versus like all natural versus GMO, especially in the disability community?
Listen, I'm under no pretense that the healthier you're eating, the more expensive it is, and the more effort that has to go into it. I believe in supporting organic, but I would if I'm just going through a local chain store, grocery store, they have that little tiny section of organic produce and half of it looks like it's been there too long. Like, I'm not buying that, right? Like, if I'm buying organic, I want to go to the farmer's market. I want to see the farmer firsthand. I want to talk to them. This day and age, there's no excuse. There's farmers markets in every city. You just have to find them and do your meal prep around those. Genetically modified organisms, as they call it, the GMO.
Yeah,
There's two camps to that. One, genetically modified foods save lives. For example, if it's a drought resistant form of rice that is developed that they can use in India, where the climates have changed over the years, and communities that needed that rice as sustenance no longer can grow what they used to grow, but now they have a new rice that they're able to grow, right, or grain or other types of food that have been modified in order to grow in high acidic soil, high saline soil. So there are good things about genetically modified produce and vegetables and whatnot. However, it gets a little trickier when you're looking at things that are modified more for just simple cosmetic, aspects of it, or pesticide resistant. A lot of times, a big part of what's the easiest thing to look at in our food system that is incredibly wrong, besides the highly processed cuisine, the foods and chips and cereals and all that stuff, is what, every time we eat a piece of meat, most notably beef, for example, there's a good chance that that cow was finished or raised on corn, which makes the best beef. It's that fatty, juicy beef that we love, the great marbling. However, that corn has a 95% chance that it is a genetically modified version of corn, and that corn was there's probably a 60 to 75% that corn, the seed itself is a genetically modified version of corn from Monsanto. Monsanto is one of the largest companies in the world, but they also own Roundup. So just kind of give you how crazy the United States is. Roundup, the pesticide, the weeds, the insect, weed, I don't know what they call it, insecticide.
Yeah, like the pesticide or
Yeah,
insecticide.
basically, kills anything it touches, right? Flora, fauna, insects, it doesn't matter, right? It kills everything. However, they modified this corn to sustain sprays of this Roundup, this glycol, so that it kills everything in the field except that corn. So imagine that. Like, that's the food we're eating every single day in our lives. We don't even really notice that. So in that case, while it's made it easier for farmers to be able to grow this stuff and not have to worry about weeds and all that, it's also created the need for these farms to not only buy the seed from Monsanto, but they also buy the chemicals to spray on it. But then, because the soil's dead, there's not an insect alive in it. There's no microbes. There's nothing in that soil. They are brown, barren fields after they harvest the corn. The farmers have to buy the chemical inputs, the fertilizers, the lab made fertilizers, not natural fertilizers, to put back in the soil the next year, so they can do it again and again and again and again, year over year. So this is the corn, the wheat, the majority of what we're eating has been genetically modified in a way that it makes it not susceptible to these weed killers and all that. So that system is a trickle down effect, right? The cows eat the corn. The Roundup goes in their system, it goes into ours. They need more antibiotics because they're in feedlots. So it's a really complicated and complex situation that we've developed here in the United States, and who's benefiting the most is the corporations. So I always say to people, you vote every time you buy a product, every time you purchase your Lucky Charms versus your healthy version of whatever it is. You are voting and saying, you know what, I'm down with this. Doritos, and listen, I'm guilty. I'm not sitting there up on a pedestal saying I don't eat this stuff.
Sure.
I crave my spicy Cheetos, every once in a while.
Love
But at the
them.
same
Love
time,
them.
like, it's one of those things where you have to be aware of it and make sure that you're putting the money where your money where the people that are doing it the right way are.
I can dig it. I really want to ask you this question of, because one, everything that you said, I can imagine like what it's like when you're watching food commercials and it's like, yeah, try this all new McDonald's burger or this cheeseburger here. You're probably like, yeah, no, like I'm
Nope.
gonna go over here and I'm not gonna go eat that. And it's tough, especially you grow up on certain foods. Like my son loves McDonald's. My youngest, he wants two plain cheeseburgers, no
Yep.
diced onions, no nothing like that.
Yep.
And sometimes I'm like, man, like should I be giving it to him or not? Is it in moderation or what have you? But And these last two questions, one, and I heard you mention it on your podcast, but when you think about this sandwich, what are you calling it? Is it a Subway, a grinder? Is it a hoagie? It's a hero, especially going between New York and Philly. Like, what is it for you? And I know that you're not a fan of the cheesesteak like that. You know what I mean? You had a better
Okay, you've done your
recommendation.
research on me. Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
So, the cheesesteak is Philly's biggest export, hands down. There's nothing in Philadelphia that is globally known around the world more than the cheesesteak.
It's
In
true.
fact, there's cheesesteaks in shops in Pakistan. There's cheesesteak shops in Tokyo, and not just like Americans doing it, like
Yeah.
individuals from native to those countries who have opened a cheesesteak shop, right? And so for me, the average cheesesteak is trash, 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 trash. There are a handful of places in Philadelphia who actually treat their meat right. They season it. They actually have a hot grill that they caramelize the meat on. They have fresh baked bread that they're baking themselves. They're nice, dark, crunchy rolls with the call them hoagie rolls. The long sub rolls, whatever you want to call them, with sesame seeds on them. They're
Yep.
artisan through and through, right? There's about three or four of them in Philadelphia that I'll get down with. In fact, I had one last night at an event I went to from this place, Uncle Gus's, that is a newcomer, and they're baking their own bread and everything. And I'll hand it to them. Like, that's a really, the first thing you taste is that delicious bread with the
Mm.
sesame seeds, and then you taste the caramelization of the onions and the meat and all that. Like, I'm down with that. Like, I'll get down with that. However, when I came to Philadelphia, every question I got was about a damn cheesesteak. And
Right.
what I realized after going on a sandwich tour with some fellow sandwich crazy people that Philadelphia has something called the roast pork sandwich, and that roast pork is often either with spicy broccoli rabe or spinach and sharp provolone cheese. It's a hot sandwich. It's juicy. It's messy. Like, I was like, this is more my speed. But then you have the hoagie culture. Hoagie culture is its own thing, and hoagie just refers to what a lot of people would refer to as a sub sandwich, a grinder, a hero, etc. Um, don't dare call it a sub in Philadelphia. Uh, you will be ungraciously kicked out of the city.
Mm.
But it is a love affair down here with them. And as a kid who grew up eating sandwiches all the time, breakfast, lunch, dinner, didn't matter. My brother would have his bowl of cereal in the morning. I would have my ham sandwich in the morning. That my mom would make, and so I've always had a love affair with sandwiches. High Street was a bread bakery, sandwich shop, pasta shop. So,
Mm.
I literally built a restaurant around bread and sandwiches. So, for me, when I came to Philly and realized how incredibly excited people were about their sandwiches here. When I moved to New York City, I expected like Italian delis on every corner, from movies and whatnot. But I get there and
Yeah.
it's mostly like, your average poppy
Pizza,
restaurant,
Chinese restaurant.
exactly,
Yeah, I got you.
bodega that
Yeah.
has like stale bread and boar's head salami, so it's definitely not a love affair with the sandwich, where in Philadelphia, it is still without a doubt a complete love affair with a hoagie. So I appreciate that about Philadelphia. And you go to South Philly, it is still old school. You got the old school delis making their own mozzarella. You got, it really is something special. South Philadelphia, I hope never changes, because those traditions are alive and well. And now you see there's a shop called Farina De Vita. He's a second generation young guy who's doing his own version of an Italian deli, and it's just magic.
Awesome. Awesome. Finally, I think about your injury, with the way it occurred, and also the things that came out of it, such as positive train control. They focus more on it, even though it's been implemented from the 1970s. And I know from just reading that it was a lot of bureaucracy why these things weren't there. They could have
Yep.
very much, stopped and prevented that tragedy. But, you spoke a lot about, several things, from restaurant activities during COVID and trying to, get your establishment to survive, being injured, being able to still try and hold up your restaurant. But the biggest thing that I heard you speak about was just the trauma and how it impacted you. There was times that you felt like taking your life and what have you. And I think that
Hmm.
sentiment is shared with many of us when we're going through such things. So real quickly, if you could just tell the viewers what are some ways that you cope, and in the context of helping someone feel better, is there a certain comfort food you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it got to that point. We lived on the Upper East Side when I got injured, and I could go over to just cross this little bridge over the East River to this little island that was like more like a little rec area over there, and there was a place that didn't have any guardrails up. I could easily just rode my wheelchair right into the river and be done with it. It's something I sat there and pondered. It's something that I had in the back of my head because things were that bad. Even with a 3-year old, an excited little 3-year old boy, you almost wondered if he was better without me. Those kind of questions are going through your head because the toxicity that was at home was not good, and I didn't see a way out because I was so dependent on somebody helping me. So with that said, anyone going through an injury like this, the majority of people will feel that there is no silver lining. However, you have to sometimes make your silver lining. You can't sit around and wait for it. Just like what you're doing, Corey. You're producing music. You have a podcast that is positively affecting people's lives. Somebody who's newly injured can listen to this and see examples firsthand and hear examples firsthand of individuals who have lived it and have got to the other side without an incredible psychologist that I had who works at Mount Sinai up in New York. Still to this day, Angela Riccobono. I don't know if I would have ever have been able to see the forest through the trees. She was able to be that person who showed me examples of individuals, just like you, who are remarried, have kids after injury, stuff that I just couldn't even imagine that somebody could love me, right? Like, how can somebody love somebody who's broken?
Yes.
But there are people that will love you, and you'll find that person. So, having examples of what you're doing on this show, Corey, are great. Like, what I do is pure entertainment. Delicious City, Chef Radio. Yes, people can learn from my story and be more aware of people with disabilities, and I can be a good example of an individual who has pushed on and persevered and shown resilience and all that, which is kind of baked into my DNA naturally. I'm not somebody who can just like kind of sit still and fade into the background. However, what you're doing, Corey, like, is head and shoulders more important than what I do, because you are giving people living, real, tangible examples of how to cope, how to move on, and how to move forward in a way that brings real purpose and a sense of belonging to people once again. So I just want to give you your flowers for that because I'm I hate saying this. I hate getting people when they say it to me, like, "Oh, you're such an inspiration." But I look at your situation, Corey, and what you've been able to do and continue to do is it gives me motivation. So
Absolutely, and I thank you for that. And a lot of credit really points to um, Jonathan Sigworth, who is the CEO of More Than Walking, and he brought me on board doing the podcast, and it was during the COVID era where he not only brought me on board to do the podcast, but created a job position for me. And
nice.
especially this year, not only are we focusing on those who have persevered, but the vocational aspect of
There you go.
returning back to work or
Yep.
trying to contribute to society. Where we've seen in the news, DEIA
Yep.
hirings are not what is supposed to be popping, and we want to
Yep.
get away from those things, at least, in the general public's eye, but it's not true. What people with disabilities really hope for is not necessarily the cure or fix, for the disability. Of course, we would all love that and enjoy it, but we just want to be a part of the community and respect it and honor. And yes, can you make accommodations to help us so that we can be as active as possible? Again, when I go to places and restaurants, I'm always looking out for like how can things improve and how can they be better. And I'm just very thankful that a lot of the hosts, and I've never ran into no issues, but they're just open and they're just like, sir, how would you like that? Would you like a straw?
Yes.
With your wine or whatever the case
Yes.
may be, and it's a
Yes.
wonderful thing because now you're being attentive, which makes me in turn tell other people with disabilities and even other able-bodied folks, hey, listen, man, you got to go check out that following restaurant because that is a great place to go to. But man, this has been such a wholesome conversation. Speaking to you has made me incredibly hungry.
Yeah,
So
no,
a
let's get on
little
with
bit,
it,
yeah, a
right?
little bit later, I'm going to enjoy something that my wife cooked because she's a excellent cook, enjoys it, serves the family and
So
extended
let me
family.
ask you this. You said you were Jamaican. So
Yeah.
do you get down on the ackee and saltfish?
Yeah, man, I eat whatever. I just, I can't do certain seafoods and stuff because
Okay.
I'm allergic. But yeah,
All
I get
right.
saltfish. I mainly am a jerk pork, jerk
Okay.
chicken
Uh-huh.
type of guy with rice and
Sure.
peas. I grew up eating um, stewed chicken almost like every week and stuff. So like
Stewed
I got
chicken,
like an
baby. I love
aversion
it.
towards it. But no, I love my country's. I'm not from there. My parents, my ancestry is there.
Yeah,
But
man.
like
It's in your
I
DNA.
love it. In my town, there's a lot of Jamaican restaurants that you can frequent if you want. So
Nice.
it's an enjoyable thing to be able to order those stuff. But I also, am really in tune with like Spanish food and Spanish culture and stuff.
Yep.
So I like to order a lot of different Spanish cuisines. So it just opens up, my palate. Not to go too far into, it, but I remember listening to one of your other podcasts, and the gentleman said like he was food deprived when he was little, and I think that's true. The versatility you don't necessarily get. I grew up down the street from a KFC. So every Friday, it's
Get that
original
bucket.
recipe or
Yep.
extra
Yep.
crispy, or my mom is bringing home, pizza or something like that. And of course, down up the street was two gas stations. So, I'm getting, certain meals from
Yep.
there. But as I got older, expand my palate, and now I enjoy so many things that I had an aversion to when I was little. Real quickly, how can people get in touch with you? What are the names of your two podcasters? Quick plug for that.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, if someone wants to reach out to me just to shoot the shit or whatever, I'm happy to. You can find me on Instagram, for example, and it's at Eli Kulp. You can find our podcasts on all your platforms. One is Delicious City Philly, which is really all about the food scene in Philadelphia, restaurants, food news. We have great guests on who are doing fun things in the scene. And then I have Chef Radio podcast, which more is a industry driven, deep dive into people's careers. However, even if you're not in the food space, you're still going to learn a lot of inspirationally charged, ways of just dealing with life, resilience, and all that. Because this, similar to a lot of industries, is challenging. So, I think people get it. People from all walks of life love that podcast. And as far as the restaurants, if you're ever in Philadelphia, well, first make sure you hit me up. Let me know if you're in town. I'll make sure that we make any accommodations needed for you. So we have Fork Restaurant, which is our flagship. It's more of our highest level of dining restaurant. Then we have High Street, and we just opened a new bakery called the Bread Room, which is pretty awesome. And then we have a kitchen in Rittenhouse Square. So if any of these restaurants, if you want to try them out when you're in town, any listener, whoever, of course you, Corey, I'd love to have a meal with you someday. Please reach out
Absolutely.
to me.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to. I haven't been to Philly in a long time. Last time I was in Pennsylvania was a few years ago, and we took a trip to Hershey
There you go.
to
Yeah,
enjoy
say bring the family. There's a lot of fun stuff to do in Philly, especially this year with being the 250th birthday of the
anniversary.
country. So
Yeah, I remember a spot when I was little that they had like all these telephones that you could like pick up and you could hear and talk to like the president or anybody that signed the Declaration of
oh yeah,
Independence or involved in the Constitution. It was like a board and you could dial the number. This is going way back to like 1995 or so.
okay, okay.
That was an enjoyable time. But man, listen, thank you for participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion. Everyone, please stay tuned in and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast and click that notification bell so you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables. Until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else, keep adapting.